Welcome to video 3. Today, when people think about the drug war, many focus, understandably, on fentanyl. But America's drug war goes, goes back long before fentanyl deaths began rising sharply in 2013, or before Purdue Pharma first launched OxyContin in 1996. To understand why this crisis has been so hard to contain and why so many well-intentioned responses have fallen short, we have to consider the origins of America's and the world's war on drugs more than a century ago. The hard lesson of the book's chapter 1 is this: we must confront the two original sins of the drug war, racism and stigma, to effectively combat today's crisis. From the very beginning, drug use in the United States was framed as a moral failing, often tied to specific racial or ethnic groups. In this video, I argue that America's approach to drugs was shaped by early policy choices that still influence how we think about drugs, addiction, and the people affected by them. These choices are built into the foundation of the US drug war, and they created consequences we're still living with today. That harsh framing of the early war on drugs didn't happen by accident. One of the most influential figures was Harry Anslinger, the first commissioner of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics at the Department of the Treasury, the precursor to later federal drug czars. Under his leadership, drug policy became deeply entwined with fear-based narratives. People who used drugs were portrayed as dangerous, deviant, and morally weak. These narratives, highlighted by Anslinger in books, brochures, and news releases, weren't just rhetoric. They shaped enforcement priorities and public attitudes. At the time, addiction was poorly understood. It wasn't recognized as a chronic health condition. Further, there were no evidence-based treatment programs and virtually no investment in trying to develop them. That one-sided emphasis began to shift in the 1970s when new treatment programs were piloted and federally funded during the Nixon administration. Yes, President Nixon, who was understandably remembered for his tough law and order rhetoric, also brought in highly qualified psychiatrists to develop a national network of methadone clinics that successfully reduced heroin use and related crime. But even with this major step forward, the emphasis on supply-side approaches and the lack of empathy for those who were struggling with addiction endured. So why does this matter now in the middle of today's opioid crisis? Because those early assumptions about who uses drugs, why they use them, and how society should respond never fully disappeared. Stigma became a lasting feature of American drug policy. It discouraged people from seeking help. It shaped how communities responded to addiction, and it made it politically easier to invest in enforcement rather than in treatment and research on addiction. Even as science advanced and our understanding of addiction improved, the system's basic architecture remained largely intact, built to punish, control, and exclude rather than treat, support, and reintegrate. And while interest in treatment and research did grow in the 70s and 80s, those efforts were not scaled to match the size of the problem. As drug use patterns shifted and drug problems intensified, the system was very slow to adapt. Insufficient investments were made to ensure that all in need could access high-quality treatment programs of sufficient duration. This is a problem we still very much face today. This history raises an uncomfortable but necessary question. How do we bring forward a deeper understanding of the harm caused by these choices without getting stuck in a politicized debate about the distant past? Chapter 1 proposes the creation of a national opioid crisis memorial museum and education center, an institution with a mission to portray this history honestly, explore how the opioid crisis emerged, and remember those who lost their lives in their struggle with drugs. Such a museum would serve several critical purposes. It would inform the public and policymakers about past mistakes and about what evidence tells us is working well today. It would elevate the voices of families and people in recovery as essential witnesses to the crisis, and it would honor the lives that have been lost with respect, dignity, and love. Let me emphasize something that people like me who spend our time talking about policy programs and resources can lose focus on the grief, pain, and deep emotional suffering carried by parents, siblings, roommates, and friends of those who have died. They deserve easy access to grief counseling and a respectful way to permanently remember their loved one. I always be grateful to one of my graduate students, Gina Malagold, who lost her younger brother to a fatal drug overdose, for helping me understand this more deeply. The Memorial Museum isn't about punishment or blame. It's about truth, memory, compassion, and learning. A place that helps us remember the past accurately and gives us the clarity we need to chart a better future. The consequence of these early choices, especially those shaped by Harry Anslinger, became unmistakably clear during the crack cocaine epidemic of the 1980s. That period, explored in the next video, was a major stress test of America's drug policy, and it revealed in stark terms how a system built too much on stigma, racial prejudice, and enforcement responds to a dangerous new drug crisis. Thank you, and please join me for video 4.